The Invite is a relationship drama that uses an awkward dinner party to explore marriage, intimacy, communication, jealousy, and the different ways people choose to live. The story follows Joe and Angela, a married couple whose relationship has slowly fallen apart. They argue constantly, they haven't had sex in a year, and much of their connection now seems to revolve around their daughter. Their problems become even harder to ignore when Angela invites their upstairs neighbors, Piña and Hawk, over for dinner. What begins as a simple attempt to get along with the neighbors eventually becomes a night where both couples are forced to talk honestly about their relationships. The film begins with Joe returning home from his job as a jazz band teacher at a conservatory. This tells us something important about him immediately. Joe once wanted to be a musician, but instead of pursuing the career he wanted, he's now teaching music. He also comes home to a marriage that clearly makes him unhappy. Angela tells him that she has invited their upstairs neighbors, Piña and Hawk, over for dinner, and Joe immediately becomes frustrated because the couple has been having loud sex upstairs. The noise has become a regular source of conflict, and Joe wants to confront them about it. Angela, however, is more concerned about making a good impression, so she asks Joe to control himself and avoid causing a scene. This opening establishes the main difference between Joe and Angela. Joe is direct and often aggressive, while Angela tries to avoid conflict and maintain the appearance that everything is fine. Neither approach solves their problems because they're both avoiding the real issue. The noise from upstairs is especially important because it becomes a symbol of what Joe and Angela are missing. Their neighbors are apparently enjoying a healthy sex life, while Joe and Angela have not been intimate for an entire year. Every time they hear the couple upstairs, they're reminded of the part of their own relationship that has disappeared. Joe's connection to music is also introduced here as an important part of his character. Music represents something personal that he has gradually lost touch with. He teaches it for a living, but he's no longer emotionally connected to playing it himself. This creates a connection between his career and his marriage. In both areas of his life, Joe has settled into something that no longer seems to make him happy. Piña and Hawk arrive while Joe and Angela are still arguing, immediately making the dinner uncomfortable. Angela has clearly tried to prepare for the evening, but she's not ready. She has no wine and has not even checked Piña's dietary restrictions. Joe makes the situation worse by openly antagonizing the couple instead of pretending to be friendly. However, Piña and Hawk don't react the way Joe expects. Rather than being offended by his blunt personality, they seem to appreciate the fact that he's honest and doesn't try to hide what he thinks. This scene introduces one of the film's biggest ideas: the difference between being honest and trying to look perfect. Angela is worried about being a good host because she wants the neighbors to like her, but her attempts to control the evening only make her more nervous. Joe does the opposite by refusing to hide his frustration. Although his behavior isn't always polite, Piña and Hawk find something refreshing about it because they can see what he's actually thinking. As the evening continues, Joe starts to become more comfortable with Piña and Hawk, but that changes when he learns that Hawk has seen Angela naked through a window. Joe is clearly uncomfortable with this information, especially because his relationship with Angela is already damaged. He's jealous of Hawk and becomes more aware of the fact that another man has seen his wife in an intimate situation. This moment isn't simply about jealousy. It shows how insecure Joe has become within his own marriage. He already feels disconnected from Angela, and the fact that Hawk has seen her naked makes him feel even more threatened. Joe's reaction also shows how differently he views intimacy from his neighbors. For Joe, seeing Angela naked is connected to privacy and the boundaries of marriage. For Piña and Hawk, their attitudes towards sex and intimacy are much more open. Later in the evening, Piña and Hawk finally apologize for the noise coming from upstairs. They explain that they participate in sex parties, which is the reason Joe and Angela have been hearing them. Instead of simply being angry, Joe and Angela become curious. Piña then reveals that she and Hawk actually invited them to dinner because they wanted to invite them to participate in group sex. This revelation completely changes the direction of the evening. Until this point, Joe and Angela have been judging Piña and Hawk from the outside. They assumed their neighbors were simply a couple who had a more active sex life than they did. Now they discover that their relationship operates according to very different rules. More importantly, They begin to question whether their own ideas about marriage and intimacy are the only way relationships can work. The invitation itself has a deeper meaning. Piña and Hawk aren't just inviting Joe and Angela to have sex with them. They're also inviting them to question the rules and assumptions they have built their marriage around. Joe and Angela are attracted to the idea because they're desperate for something different, but the film doesn't present this lifestyle as a simple solution. Piña and Hawk may be more sexually open, but they aren't presented as having a perfect relationship. After watching Joe and Angela fight throughout the night, Piña becomes unsure about having group sex with them. Instead, the couples decide to swap partners. Angela becomes too nervous to initiate anything with Hawk, while Joe falls while dancing with Piña and hurts his back. The situation becomes awkward and the excitement they had imagined quickly disappears. The scene is funny, but it also reveals an important truth about Joe and Angela. They have been thinking about sex as something that might help them escape their problems. But once they're actually given the opportunity, they realize that their problems can't simply be removed by changing partners. Angela's nervousness suggests that she's not comfortable pretending that everything is fine, while Joe's accident almost physically interrupts the fantasy they've created. This is why the film doesn't treat sex as the solution to their marriage. Their lack of intimacy is really a symptom of a much larger emotional problem. They have stopped trusting each other, they resent each other, and they barely communicate. Bringing another person into the relationship can't automatically fix those issues. The failed partner swap therefore becomes a way of showing that Joe and Angela need to deal with the emotional problems first. After the failed attempt at intimacy, Joe and Angela begin arguing again. Joe becomes angry at Piña and Hawk and blames them for the situation. Piña eventually pushes Joe and Angela to talk honestly about their relationship. This is where Piña becomes almost like an outside observer who can see the problem more clearly than Joe and Angela can. They have spent the entire night arguing about individual things: the noise upstairs, the dinner, jealousy, sex, and the neighbors. However, none of those arguments are actually the main problem. Piña helps them understand that all of these smaller conflicts are symptoms of the same deeper issue. The scene shows the difference between arguing and communicating. Joe and Angela have no problem talking to each other, but most of their conversations are about blame. They're trying to prove that the other person is responsible for their unhappiness. Piña forces them to stop doing that and start explaining how they actually feel. This becomes one of the most important moments in the film because it's the first time they seriously examine the state of their marriage instead of simply fighting about it. Piña eventually learns that Joe and Angela have built up a large amount of resentment toward each other. They haven't had sex in a year, and much of the reason they have remained together is their daughter, Maggie. Piña suggests that they should consider separating instead of staying together only because they believe it's better for their child. She also suggests that they could try to completely change the way they understand their relationship because the current version of their marriage seems to have reached its limit. This is the emotional center of the film because Joe and Angela finally admit what has been happening for a long time. Their lack of sex isn't really the main problem. It's one of the clearest signs that their emotional connection has already broken down. They have become so resentful of each other that intimacy has disappeared along with trust and affection. The discussion about Maggie also challenges the idea that parents should always stay together for their children. The film doesn't say that separation is automatically better, but it asks whether remaining in an unhappy marriage is actually healthy for a child. If parents are constantly fighting and living with resentment, simply keeping the family together may not solve anything. Piña's other suggestion is just as important. Joe and Angela could try to redefine their relationship instead of continuing to force it to work in its current form. Joe and Angela eventually seem to agree that separating may be the best option. Instead of immediately fighting about it, they calmly begin discussing what they'll do next. This is actually one of the healthiest conversations they have had throughout the film because they're finally thinking about their future instead of trying to win an argument. There's some irony in the fact that Joe and Angela seem to communicate better once they consider ending their marriage. For most of the film, they've been putting pressure on themselves to keep their relationship together even though they're clearly unhappy. Once they accept that the marriage might end, some of that pressure disappears. They can finally talk about what they actually want instead of pretending that everything can return to normal. This scene also removes the need to decide who is responsible for the failure of the marriage. Rather than asking who ruined the relationship, they begin asking what they should do next. That change is important because it shows emotional growth. They may not know whether they will ultimately separate, but they're finally looking at their relationship honestly. When Joe and Angela return from the kitchen, they discover that Piña and Hawk have left. Their guests entered the apartment as strangers and ended up forcing the couple to confront problems that had been hidden for a long time. Their departure leaves Joe and Angela alone with the choices they now have to make. Piña and Hawk are important because they never actually solve Joe and Angela's problems. They simply create the circumstances that allow Joe and Angela to see those problems more clearly. Their departure also reminds us that the final decision belongs to Joe and Angela. Piña can give them advice, but she can't decide what their marriage should become. Once the neighbors leave, there's no longer anyone to distract them from the truth. They have to decide for themselves whether they want to separate or find another way forward. After the neighbors leave, Joe returns to his office and sits at his piano. Earlier in the film, he had refused to play, which reflected how disconnected he had become from music and from himself. Now, after confronting the problems in his marriage, he finally begins playing again. Angela eventually joins him, creating a quiet ending where the couple connects without arguing. The piano is the strongest symbol in the ending because it represents Joe's identity. He has spent much of his life surrounded by music, but somewhere along the way he stopped doing something that actually mattered to him. Returning to the piano suggests that he's beginning to reconnect with himself instead of defining his entire life through his failed career and his frustrations. Angela joining him is just as important. The film doesn't tell us that they've definitely decided to stay together, and it doesn't completely confirm that they will separate either. Instead, it ends with them sharing something peacefully. Music becomes a different form of communication between them. They don't need to argue, explain themselves, or blame each other. For the first time in a long time, they're simply experiencing something together. The invite uses an uncomfortable dinner between two very different couples to examine what happens when a relationship stops working, but the people involved are afraid to admit it. Piña and Hawk force them to confront problems they have ignored for years, while the final piano scene suggests that their relationship can only move forward if they are honest about what they truly want. Make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one.